Then there's Grandsanta, the last Santa before his son Malcolm took over. Grandsanta is very much the cynical elder who thinks the old ways were better and constantly talks about his glory days. He doesn't like the new technology or the way Christmas has changed over time. Grandsanta is usually the favorite with people watching this movie, and for good reason, as this character is hilarious. He gets the best lines in the film, some of which come out of nowhere and often surprised me into laughter.
No, Arthur. There is a way.
It's impossible.
They used to say it was impossible to teach women to read.
He also has this habit of constantly referring to people by nicknames using alliteration, which I think is a fun character quirk. His whole motivation for delivering the present is because he wants to prove to Santa and Steve that the old way of doing things was the best way. Problem is, he's considerably older, and a lot of things he's using is out of date, so matched with Arthur's incompetence, they both cause a lot of trouble along the way. But the best thing about this character, the very best thing, is that even though he's somewhat selfish and cynical throughout the majority of the film, ultimately his character has surprising emotional depth. His reasoning for being selfish is realistic and human. There's a conversation between him and Arthur later in the film where he explains why he wanted so badly to prove to his son and Steve that he was the better Santa. And apart from the whole Santa Claus thing, it sounds very much like an elderly person's motivations when faced with the frustration of not being able to do the things they used to do. And this is sort of the same case with Santa himself, or Malcolm as it were. This is a very different imagining than in the Polar Express. It paints Santa as a flawed and human character. Malcolm is on his 70th mission as Santa, and it's generally considered that he's going to retire and hand over the job to Steve after the mission is complete. But he doesn't, despite the fact that he really has gotten a little too old to do the job, and because of how much his son has changed things, barely understands how anything works. And the reason he doesn't want to retire is because he doesn't know who he'll be when he's not Santa anymore, and he doesn't want to be in a position where he has to just sit around and watch his son do the job, even though Steve already does everything and makes most of the decisions anyways. Because of this, he kind of overlooks both of his sons, expecting too much from Steve and expecting too little from Arthur. There are a couple of other somewhat minor characters like Mrs. Claus and Peter that I'll go over quickly before moving on. Mrs. Claus seems to be the mediator for the family while also doing apparently everything else, from making dinner to negotiating a treaty with Greenland. She also seems to be fairly shrewd and observant, as well as sensible and supportive. She seems to be aware of a lot of things that the other characters sort of overlook. Peter is pretty funny. He's an elf with a sort of weird crush on Steve. He's a brown-noser to the point of excess, and obviously thinks he's better than everyone else just because he's the one who gets Steve's espresso. Alright, can't avoid this. Let's look at the animation. Obviously, you can already guess my feelings towards the animation in the Polar Express. It's motion capture, and in many ways a much more unpolished type of motion capture than even in modern films using the animation style. A lot of people complained about the dead eyes when this movie came out, and unlike in later films, there really was no effort to make the characters look less realistic. I'm not going to go into all of this again because I think I've covered it enough in the last two reviews I did. Apart from the characters, the animation is great. It's very pretty and there are some nice angles. The hubcap thing still confuses me, but one moment I absolutely love is the scene with the bell. Between the slow-mo music and the angle on the ice, it's freaking awesome. And the movie was quite impressive when it came out, despite its flaws. The animation in Arthur Christmas actually upset a lot of people, not because it's bad, but because Aardman fans didn't understand why Aardman was using CG instead of claymation. Personally, I don't like to get hung up over what type of animation a studio uses, unless it affects the film, so I don't care that Aardman's first film in something like 5 years was CG. They did try to employ certain methods in the CG because they were used to claymation. One thing they did was pay careful attention to textures. They wanted everything to look as if you could touch it because they're used to being able to touch their characters in sets. Because of this, stuff like Arthur's sweater, hair, surfaces, stuff like that really does stand out. I wouldn't say it's exceptionally impressive animation, but I can tell a lot of care went into it. That leaves us with the story. As I said, both movies have very simple stories, and really the goal of both movies seems to be to capture the Christmas spirit. It's just one film does it better. So let's talk about the bits in the Polar Express that I like. Firstly, I like the whole opening, which is nice because it actually does a really good job of setting up the story with very little words. It has charm. I know pretty much all I need to know within a few rather well-crafted minutes. I'd say I like just about everything up to that hot chocolate scene because ironically, while the opening tells you quite a lot in a short time, a good portion of the film then tells you nothing in nearly an hour. Next, I like the conversation with the hobo about the existence of Santa. There's an interesting idea about belief, and seeing the contrast between what he says and what the conductor says is interesting. I also very much like the scene where the main character can't hear the bells. It's really the first time in the movie where I feel really bad for him, and I like most of what happens afterwards, with an exception to the Steven Tyler elf, and a couple of details I'll get to in a second. So at risk of an uproar from fans, I'll get this out of the way right away. You may have noticed some gaps, like the whole middle of the story. Well, let me explain. I like the Polar Express. I watch it every year, but it is a deeply flawed film. And in a lot of ways, I think quite a few of the flaws come from, again, the 3D. I mean, look at the train ride. It's almost entirely padding. We spend over 2 minutes watching the progress of a train ticket, and yes, I did time it since you ask, and it doesn't go anywhere. It just ends up back where it started again. There are a couple of superfluous songs. I actually don't mind the song Billy and Girl sings, just because there are a few verses I like, but the hot chocolate scene is pretty pointless. This is completely useless. The train gets stopped because of caribou in the tracks, and it's solved almost immediately because of... what am I looking at here? They get stuck on the ice for a while, which is at least a real conflict, but all of this is just obviously a roller coaster ride for the 3D. The plot comes to almost a complete standstill, with no further insights into the characters or story, and is pretty much entirely the equivalent of an amusement park ride. But weirdly enough, that is not my problem with this movie. My biggest problem is that it seems to have trouble with the tone it's trying to set. And I'm not talking about the random creepy bits. I'm okay with those. I'm actually talking about the North Pole itself. We have a whole movie based on taking a train to the North Pole, so I feel like this North Pole should blow me away. Instead, it kind of creeps me out a little. The whole thing feels cold to me. There's something almost eerie about these scenes, between the tinny Christmas music playing out of the megaphones over the empty streets and the elves. It's very devoid of warmth.
I'll take care of this. It's in good hands. Trust me. In good hands. Trust me.
Even Santa himself kind of adds to this, to be honest. I'm okay with the sort of wizardly wise, all-knowing Santa, but, well, this scene gets to me. So we have Billy here, who I'm guessing Santa has never visited. Why is that? I don't know, the movie doesn't tell you. Here he finally has his present, which that creepy elf takes back. Okay, fine. But why this line?
And Billy. It is Billy.
I sometimes forget because you're poor. I realize this is not what they were trying to do here. It's supposed to be funny, but I don't know. I find it a little cold. I mean, why does Santa forget this one kid? And you know, I don't think it's the fault of the 3D in this case. I am not at all captivated by this North Pole. And here we come to the crux of this comparison. In Arthur Christmas, most of the plot surrounds one kid. No one in particular, just one in the millions and millions of children delivered to by Santa. Because of a mistake, her gift gets knocked off of the assembly line, and when discovered, it winds up being brushed off by Steve, who doesn't see the point of going to any trouble over one single child. It's Arthur and Grandsanta who wind up trying to deliver the present, and do so in the old sleigh. Bryony stows a way to fix the wrapping on the present, and after that, again, most of the movie takes place in transit, as the three of them find themselves getting into various situations caused by either Arthur or Grandsanta. Now here's the thing about this movie. We have a situation where the North Pole is underground, the walls and floors are made of ice, and there's very little warmth in places like Mission Control and Steve's S1. Gwen, the child Santa forgot, is constantly referred to by her number, particularly by Steve. Arthur's the only one who calls her by name. And most of the characters are acting out of their own self-interest. And yet Arthur Christmas does not feel cold. And the reason for that is that a lot of care and attention has gone into making this film feel a certain way. The lighting, for instance, which is carefully controlled from the sleek, cool lighting on the S1 to the warm, cozy lighting in Arthur's office. They used odd colors or lighting for scenes like the Trelew, Mexico scene, so the audience is aware that something is amiss. The characters themselves aren't cruel or mean-spirited, even at their worst. They're just human and flawed. There's also an excellent balance in this film between heart and humor. Arthur Christmas has a wonderful sense of humor, as well as a very genuine sense of heart. There's just enough of both for it to be perfect. Enough humor so things don't get cheesy, enough heart so that the film is never in danger of being insincere. Now, I did not want to have many spoilers, particularly with Arthur Christmas, which is still very new. So I'll leave it at that. And the only thing I'm going to say about the ending is that it is quite lovely, and there is definite emotional payoff. Really, at least for me, there's no contest here. I like both of these movies, but The Polar Express, while enjoyable at Christmas time, is not an exceptional film. Arthur Christmas isn't just a good Christmas movie, it's a damn good animated film in general. Between its quirky and expertly created characters, its magnificent and intelligent sense of humor and style, and its bold-faced sincerity, it just makes you feel good. So Arthur Christmas is the winner, and take it from me, a great way to celebrate the holiday season and get you in a good mood for Christmas. I'm the Animated Heroine, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you next year.